Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to talk about dilution series or serial dilutions. In the last video I talked about dilutions, I defined them and talked about how you can find different parts of the dilution. And just as a quick recall, dilution is a ratio of the volume of the solute, which is the compound, the substance, the concentrate, the serum, whatever, divided by the volume of the solution. So when you take a substance and dilute it with dilutant or solvent, it becomes a solution. So it's a comparison of those two volumes, and you always want to express it as 1 to some number. So if, for example, if we had a 1 to 8 dilution, it means we have 1 part of solute in 8 parts of solution. When we're talking about serial dilutions or dilution series, we're talking about taking a substance and diluting it, and then taking that solution and diluting it again to make a new solution, and then we take some of that new solution and dilute it again to make a new solution, and so on and so on. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. In my first example, we have a solution where we know what the concentration is. The concentration is 20 milligrams per deciliter. And we dilute it 1 to 4, and then we dilute it again 1 to 5. So there's 2 ways we can approach this. We can do each dilution separately, or we can do it all at once. In the previous video, I talked about how we can find the concentration of a diluted solution, and that formula was the original concentration times the dilution to get the final. So in this example, I'll go through 2 steps. I'll find the intermediate concentration, and then I'll find the final concentration. So to start with, we have 20 milligrams per deciliter as my concentration unit. It's diluted 1 to 4. So I multiply by that dilution factor. I'm going to change it to a fraction so that I can multiply. 20 times 1 over 4 will be equivalent to 5 milligrams per deciliter. So that's the concentration of the intermediate solution. Then we're going to take that and dilute it again. This time we're going to dilute it 1 to 5. We do the same process. So the intermediate concentration is 5 milligrams per deciliter. My dilution factor is 1 to 5. When I multiply 5 times 1 over 5, I'm going to get 1 milligram per deciliter. And that would be the concentration of the final solution. So you can do it in 2 steps. Find the concentration of the intermediate solution, then do the same process, find the concentration of the final solution. You could take a shortcut and do it all in 1 step as well. I could find the final solution concentration if I'm not interested in finding the intermediate concentration by just taking 20 milligrams per deciliter and multiplying by each of the dilution factors. So 20 times 1 over 4 gives me 5. 5 times 1 over 5 gives me 1. So you might see questions that are similar to this where you actually have a concentration unit and you're asked to dilute it a number of times. Another type of question that's very common is doing a series of dilutions in tubes where you're taking a certain amount of serum in tube number 1 with dilutant, and then you take a certain amount of that with more dilutant in the next tube, and then take a certain amount of that with more dilutant in the next tube, and so on. So let's take a look at an example of that. In this example, we're told that we're given a series of 6 tubes, each of which contains 4 milliliters of dilutant, which is the same as solvent. In tube number 1, we're going to add 1 milliliter of serum, and then we're going to take 1 milliliter of that solution and put in tube number 2. Then we're going to take 1 milliliter of that and add to here, and so on all the way down the line. So what we want to find is the concentration expressed as a dilution for each of these tubes. So this is solvent. We're adding 1 milliliter of solute. So we could express this concentration as a dilution as the amount of solute is 1 milliliter over the volume of solution, which is the solute plus the solvent, so 1 plus 4 is 5 milliliters. And when you're expressing a dilution, you want to make sure that your units of volume are the same, but then we can disregard those units. So the dilution, or the concentration of our first tube, is 1 to 5 serum out of the total solution. Next, we're going to take 1 milliliter of this solution and add it to tube 2, which already has 4 milliliters of solvent in it. Now, what we're going to do is find the dilution factor of that tube and multiply that by the concentration of tube 1. So if we're adding 1 milliliter, again, this will be a 1 to 5, but the concentration of this was 1 to 5. So that concentration times our dilution factor will give our new concentration, which in this case is 1 over 25. We now take 1 milliliter from this tube and add it to this tube. So the tube dilution will be 1 out of 5. And the concentration of the solution we're adding to that is 1 over 25. So remember, we take our original concentration times our dilution factor to get our new concentration. So this dilution factor or concentration will be 1 over 125. And we just continue doing that for the whole series. So again, we're taking 1 milliliter here and adding it here. So it's going to be this concentration of 1 over 125 times this new dilution factor of 1 to 5, which gives me 1 to 625 dilution. Do the same thing here. And that gives me a solution or a dilution factor of 1 to 3,125. Same thing for number 6. So now we know the dilution factor of each of these tubes as we carry out a series dilution. Let's do one more example and I'll make a slight change in the next example. Okay, in this example, we're doing a series of 5 tubes, and each of those tubes contains 9 milliliters of diluent or solvent. We're going to add 3 milliliters of serum to the first tube. And then we're going to carry out a serial dilution using 1 milliliter from the first one into the second one, 1 milliliter from the second one to the third one, 1 to the rest. So we're using 1 milliliter in the remaining tubes. So what we're going to do is start off with the dilution factor or concentration of tube number 1. So remember, we're going to find the amount of solute over the amount of solution. So it is 3 milliliters of solute over 3 plus 9 is 12 milliliters of solution. When we reduce that, that becomes 1 over 4, so it's a 1 to 4 dilution. For tube number 2, we're going to take 1 milliliter of this solution and add it to tube 2. So now we're going to have 10 milliliters of solution in tube 2, and the amount that we added was 1 milliliter, so it's going to be a 1 to 10 dilution of this. This concentration or dilution is 1 to 4, so we take 1 to 4 and we dilute it 1 to 10, which gives me 1 to 40. In tube 3, I do 1 milliliter again. So that becomes a dilution factor of 1 to 1 plus 9 is 10. And we're diluting this solution further by a ratio of 1 to 10. So 1 to 40 times that dilution will be 1 to 400. And so on. So this one will be 1 to 400. That's this concentration. And we dilute it again, we're moving 1 milliliter here. So 1 to 10 will be the dilution factor. So 1 to 4,000. And lastly, do the same thing again. 1 milliliter from tube number 4 goes into tube 5, so that will be a 1 to 10 dilution, and the concentration before we dilute it is 1 to 4,000, so that becomes 1 to 40,000. So this is how you're going to carry out a series of dilutions, and it doesn't matter how many tubes, you're just going to continue in the same manner. Just remember to express your dilution as 1 to something, and don't forget to add the solute plus the solvent to get your total volume for your solution. And the same thing here, 1 plus 9 to get the 10, and so on.